All right, so it's 3 p.m. and a very good afternoon and a warm welcome to all our participants present here today. We are all set to begin with our today's webinar. Organizations are a subunit of a society at large, and diversity and inclusion are at the heart as a core value for many organizations. Diversity and inclusion initiatives not only make companies better place to work, but also contribute to better business performance. Diverse and inclusive organizations earn trust and commitment from their employees. When people feel their ideas and contributions are truly valued and taken seriously by their organizations, they give their best. HR Association of India, along with Marching Sheep, welcomes you all to the DNI series. Marching Sheep is an HR advisory firm found in 2013 with an objective for enhancing profitability and productivity through customized and aligned people management processes, structures, leadership, and diversity interventions. It works with clients across industries on gender, sexual orientation, generational, and disability diversity. It has been adjudged among the top 5 global brands and leaders 2021 by DG Live, among top 25 HR firms in India by Business Connect, and among top 10 in Delhi NCR by Silicon India. To know more about HR Association of India and Marching Sheep, I would request all our participants to visit the link and details posted in the chat window. Request all the participants to kindly follow the webinar guidelines mentioned in the chat window. It's my privilege to introduce our guest for today, Ms. Manvi. Ms. Manvi Sushil, HR Director, South Asia, LGM, Avery Dennison. Manvi Sushil is the HR Director, Label and Graphic Materials, South Asia at Avery Dennison. She is an experienced HR leader with proven success in effective business partnering, defining and enabling people agendas in line with business needs and creating high performing diverse teams. She has displayed agility to succeed in different business contexts such as high organic growth, consolidation, acquisition, and integration of enterprises across industry sectors. Prior to joining Avery Dennison, Manvi was working with Asa Abloy, a Swedish organization, where she was HR director for South Asian countries, managing a geographically dispersed workforce of 1,400 plus employees. She was a strategic HR partner to the managing director, successfully completed M&A integration, and set up an agile people machinery responsive to business needs to provide a superior employee experience. Prior to Asa Abloy, she led talent management, learning, and OD at Bharti Infratel and also held various roles at Schneider Electric. Manvi holds a management degree in HR from Management Development Institute, Gurgaon. She is also certified on various psychometric and leadership tools for design and execution of change and leadership interventions. You can follow her on LinkedIn. The link for the same has been shared in the chat window. Now I'll introduce the moderator for our today's session, Ms. Sonika Aaron, founder and managing partner, Marching Sheep. Ms. Sonika is the founder and managing partner of Marching Sheep, which is among the most awarded HR advisory firm globally and has specialized into strategic HR advisory, diversity and inclusion interventions, employee health and wellness, along with capability building. She has recently been listed among the top 10 women entrepreneurs by Forbes India magazine, and Marching Sheep was nominated by UN Women for WEP Leadership Awards for their work during the pandemic towards gender equality, emotional well-being, and empowerment. She has worked with companies like PepsiCo, Vodafone, Roche Diagnostics, and ICI Paints in leadership roles before finding her own HR consulting firm. A mother of two, she decided to set up Marching Sheep in 2013 with a vision of making a difference to people's lives and careers and driving respect and equality for all. As a human resource and D&I specialist with an experience of more than 20 years, both in the industry and consulting, she has designed one of the most evolved diversity and inclusion frameworks in India with deep understanding of real issues faced by women, individuals from LGBTQ community and people with disability. Do feel free to follow her on LinkedIn. Details for the same are shared in the chat window. Without taking much time, I now welcome Ms. Sonika Aaron to take over this session. Over to you, Ms. Sonika.
Thank you so much, Faisal, for that wonderful introduction. And welcome once again, Manvi, to this platform.
Thank you, Sonika. Thank you for having me.
It is such a pleasure to have you here. I have worked with you and I've had you on a panel discussion also, so have an immense amount of respect for your thoughts on diversity and inclusion. And I'm hoping that today's conversation, we will bring some of those out and the audience will benefit greatly from your insights. So let's dive straight into it, Manvi. For many of us, when we are working for D&I and we are doing our regular roles and D&I comes from a place of passion for many of us. So my question is that what does D&I mean to you personally? What makes you so passionate about it?
Thank you, Sonika. What a wonderful question. And this question, I believe, is one to ask oneself every day, because there's so many nuances to it that you discover day to day in your lives and at your workplaces. So far, as per my reflection and life experiences, for me, diversity is about a true respect for a different viewpoint. That could mean even respecting my own ability to change my viewpoint because somebody has been able to influence it. So that's a very important part of diversity to me. Respect for myself and others when it comes to different viewpoints and the ability to change your viewpoints going forward. I think rigidity is the biggest enemy of diversity. When it comes to equity and inclusion, what I'm realizing is that if I have a safe place, an unbiased place to voice my opinion and to speak up, why not create it for somebody else? Because maybe our outcomes together will be a lot more effective and creative that way.
Right.
When it comes to inclusion, I feel it's about me feeling that sense of belonging. So why not create that sense of belonging and camaraderie for others? So I think for me, it's really about putting myself in somebody else's shoes and saying, if I want to be heard, if I want to be respected, why not create the same for others? That's what drives me.
Excellent. And Manvi, you are heading HR for an organization which would typically be considered, an industry which has been typically male dominated. So how has your journey been, establishing yourself and driving D&I? I've seen you drive D&I in that organization so seamlessly. So how have you done that?
Thank you, Sonika. It's a great question. We are often colored by the gender of people in front of us, and that's also a reminder not to do that, right? So if you are surrounded by male colleagues predominantly, it's important to remember that each and every male colleague is also unique in their own way. And when you create that kind of respect for others, gradually you earn that place at the table and create that kind of respect for yourself. I think one should really learn to give respect to get respect. And that to me has been my evolution in my career and life as well. So when you treat everybody as a unique individual and respect them in their own right, no two men are alike, no two women are alike. There's also diversity in various nuances that comes there. And I believe that it helps me create a place for myself. And when I create a place for myself, I create a place for my gender. And I think that's the narrative around it.
That's beautiful, because what I hear you say is that first create a place for yourself, and it comes from a place of respect, and also respect help me here a little bit. When we work in the DNI space, very often we are met with resistance. We are met with questions like, why do we need to do this? Or the other companies in the same industry are not doing it, so why is it an industry practice? Or we are okay vis-a-vis other in terms of representation, so why the need? So sometimes there are a lot of these questions that we face. So how do we counter these questions? How do we then create space? Because these, again, without putting people who are raising these questions in a bucket of saying that they're just resisting for the sake of resisting, but there must be something, and I'm coming from a place of respect here, that okay, let's respect their point of view as well.
Yeah, no, agreed, Sonika. People have a lot of questions around the why. And I often resist in falling into that trap, because this is not a logic driven answer, right? It's a constitutional right for everybody to get represented. Constitution of India, Constitution of the United States of America, and we're an American company. And luckily, Avery Dennison is a brilliant place to work, because diversity is one of our 8 core organization values. So it's a non-negotiable for leadership and employees to debate the need of a value on your organization mandate is a bit of a redundant question, I feel. So I don't fall into the trap of saying why every individual and every demographic or every underrepresented group is important. It's not a question for me to answer. It's a question for people to introspect on their own and follow our country's constitution and the values of the organization at the end of the day.
So, you're lucky that way, that it's a part of your organizational values. But let's talk about an organization which might be embarking on its journey, where it might not be a part of organizational values. So many organizations are very nascent in their journey. Many young or emerging organizations might say that this is not the right time for us for diversity and inclusion. Whereas I believe that if you've got to be creative and innovative, which every startup has to be, you need as much diversity as you want, and you want to be inclusive. You just don't want the founder to speak or the co-founder to speak, but you want your team to contribute. So from that perspective, how do you break down those defenses?
Yeah, Sonika, I would just advise people to think big. And I think most people want to think big. It comes especially to smaller companies which are hungry for growth. It comes very naturally to them to think big. It's also part of the Avery Dennison DNA, staying hungry. And I'm sure it's a part of every startup. No one starts out by saying, hey, I don't want to grow big. Right. And when you have that big, bold vision for your organization, for your organization's growth, I would urge everybody to close their eyes and really imagine that future, what kind of a culture they want to create. And if you are really thinking big in today, I would urge them to start small, because you have to start somewhere, and it might just mean, starting small today. There is no right time to do the right thing. Right. Nothing like today. So for example, we were a few, and I think I discussed that with you in one of our conversations a year or so back. We were struggling with the thought of when is the right time to introduce women on the shop floor, because of the construct and the nature of our jobs. Right. So we painted a big, large vision for ourselves. We said by 2025, we want at least 25% of our entire population to be gender balanced. And here I'm assuming a binary gender. And in that vision, we said, okay, when is it that we start? We said, let's start today. And we started with 10 women on the shop floor. That constitutes less than 3% of our shop floor today. But it's starting somewhere. And why wait for the right time? Because I don't think that right time ever comes, right? So I think in every situation, whether the company is small or big, whether it's a part of your organization values or DNA or not, everybody, I believe, wants to work in an organization that values and respects them. And if
Yeah.
you want that kind of value and respect, create it for others, because that's the only way to get a seat at the table.
Beautifully said, Manvi. And what a brilliant example that, you've got to think big and start small, and you've got to start now. So staying on with that same example, Manvi, 10 women on the shop floor, uh, what were the typical challenges that one can face? Because, the same thing can arise when people want to hire women in sales, for example, or when they want to hire women in other, for example, in infrastructure industry, at the project sites, or in how in real estate industry. So there are so many examples of industries which have typically been male dominated, and within that there have been functions which have been more so.
True.
So when we start talking about women representation in those pockets, particularly, it's all right when we talk about women representation in IT or HR or finance, because that is where you get the talent pool, you have office jobs. So it's not that much of a challenge. But I'm talking more about on the higher branches of the tree. So there, what are the typical kind of challenges that DNI professionals or HR professionals can face, and how can they overcome them?
Yeah, Sonika, I'm going to talk with experience here. I'm not going to talk idealistic. When I started off this journey, I used to think, oh, it's only a mindset issue, right? Like, let's convince the hiring managers and the leaders. Let me help work on their mindset. Let me get their accountability, and then maybe the problem will be solved. But I
Yeah.
realized a large part of the equation. I agree. Mindset is a part of it. It's not a myth. It is. I would say, if I have to proportion, it's 50% of the problem. But I think the other 50% is the real availability of talent itself, the demand and supply gap. Right. So you convince the managers, you convince the leaders, you create allies, you open the job. You're all committed to getting a diverse pipeline on the table. But when you review the pipeline and you only see one or two people from the LGBTQI community, or say one or two people who are women, or one or two people with disabilities, it's not a robust pipeline, right? And then you're not competing on meritocracy. You're
Yes.
competing on tokenism, right? And that's where I think the real cracking of the challenges. And this, I think, is a more long-term effort. To me, affirmative action is not just about closing the position and equal opportunity. It's also about creating that pipeline outside. So
Mm.
companies who can afford to do so, my urge to them is really talk about social responsibility when it comes to affirmative action, especially skilling for underrepresented groups, right? I'm so proud of Avery Dennison CSR agenda, which beautifully combines all the inclusion aspects, right? So we've been doing a lot for women in partnership with Reed, Magic Bus. We're skilling adolescents and women in those areas. We've also recently commissioned a project with Connecting Dreams for transgenders in Greater Noida, and we will be skilling them. What are we doing here? Is this an employable pool for Avery Dennison? Maybe not. But is this an employable tool for the industry and organizations at large? Yes. It is helping us in the medium term and in the long term, really balancing the demand and supply gap.
Yeah.
We're getting people ready for jobs, which is so important as a part of the DEI narrative. I agree it's more long term. I agree it needs a lot of investment and commitment. I agree the road is very difficult to reach there because of the dropout rates, etc., that we continue to face. Uh, but I think even if like you get like 40% success ratios from your batch, people getting employed, I think it's worth the buck. And we are so committed to it. That's the reason.
That's brilliant. And I think that is what initiates the virtuous cycle. Even as you said, if 40% of that batch gets employed, they become self-reliant, independent. And for them to then educate others, to make others of their own community
We
independent and
become role
reliant.
models.
Yeah, and then it just becomes a virtuous cycle. Today, a lot of them don't have what we call as the level playing ground. So, for example, a cisgender man or a woman, the binary, genders or able-bodied people, the kind of education opportunities that they get versus the kind of education opportunities that people from the LGBTQ community or people with disabilities get is not the same. And therefore, when it comes to employment opportunities, naturally there will be a gap. So
Well
what you are
said.
doing is brilliant, I mean, completely commendable. So when we come to, let's say, organizations which look at DNI as a conflicting priority or a separate priority, uh, how do we make DNI integrated into a business strategy, make people realize that it is imperative to business?
Yeah. Sonika, I think there are 2 or 3 things that I really believe makes a difference, right? One is really making sure that you are a part of social groups or exposed to media or narratives that challenge your own thinking. So I think step number 1 is going to be telling everybody to do something, watch something, be a part of the community which they are uncomfortable in. There's so much to learn there. For example, there was this movie that I watched many years back, but I keep going back to it. I'm sure it's very familiar with you, called Hidden Figures. Right?
Yes.
It's about an outcome, right? The outcome being making sure they are able to launch the man who's able to go into space, right?
Yes.
Just like a business outcome that we are all chasing. And the man, akin to the CEO of the company, has a African American lady as a part of a white male team. The lady who has to run across hallways to use the washroom and come back. And he realizes it just doesn't make sense for the outcome.
Yeah.
Right? Like if he has to achieve the outcome of launching the man into space, he has to ensure that everybody, irrespective of the color of the skin and irrespective of the gender, have access to washrooms nearby so that they don't waste time. And I think it makes business sense because that leads to good outcomes.
Yeah.
Right? And if everybody owns that, it makes business sense. Diversity, equity, inclusion makes business sense.
Yeah.
Then I think we will stop this debate, right? And we've tried our best to do that, right? We tried our best to do focus group with suppliers to ensure that the representation of our suppliers in terms of gender and diversity uh, is well mapped. Right? We try to inculcate the same values that we own as Avery Dennison and pass them on to our customers and our partners. Right? We have a set of very passionate customers. I'm so proud to say that one of our customers actually uh, is leading, like they're much ahead of us in their diversity effort when it comes to shop floor representation. Very similar business, and we learn from them. We
Yeah.
exchange notes from them. So I think if we were to able to map the entire ecosystem of a company and say what are the touch points of diversity, whether it's your customers, suppliers, internal employee story, and say, are we truly living the fact that it makes good business sense? I think everybody ends up owning it. Your supply chain team gets passionate about it. Your sales teams get passionate about it. The ones on the shop floor get passionate about it because you're owning it for the ecosystem, not just because it's good to do. And I think that's the first part of the story. The other part of the story to me is also about really ensuring you're looking at your programs with that lens. For example, we have our R&R program, like most companies have their R&R program. As a part of that, we have an award called You Make a Difference, which awards short-term projects that people have done as individuals, and it awards good outcomes for business. We've added a lens to that. We said, when you're nominating yourself for the award, also talk about what is it that you've done to include diversity in your team. We're telling them it's not just what you do to get us more business, it's also about how you practice the values day to day. Yeah. It's the same award. We haven't introduced a new D&I award. It's not a separate D&I award. It's the same award, just a new lens to it. And I think that sends out a very powerful message. Do your business, be ambitious, be ruthless when you're getting your business, right? Be meritocratic when you're getting your business. Also, let us know what you've done to do DEI. And it's together for us. It's equal weightage for us, right? And it's one award. And similarly, I can give you more examples, but I'm sure you have other questions with you.
Yeah, beautifully said. And when we get you, as you rightly said, including everybody on the leadership on board and on DEI initiatives. So when somebody starts with a DNI initiative, what should be some of their top priorities and their top metrics that one should look at? Because end of the day, we need to look at some picture of success. What should success look like? What should the journey look like? What should the process look like? So any suggestions or inputs on that?
Yeah, so Sonika, I can share with you how we started at Avery Dennison, and I can share with you what my learnings were. And if I had to do it all over again, how would I do it? Right? Like, let me just answer that question. So we started with the stereotype, like the ratios. We said we want X% of women manager and above, we want X% of women, etc. Right? And we chased the numbers. Yeah. And what we realized along the way that our hiring efforts were amazing, right? But somewhere we had lost sight of the women already, their experience already in the organization, their experiences with us. Were we, the question to us was, are we paying equal attention to retention and experience and inclusion? Right. So if I had to do it, and now we are, on the right track, and we are balancing our efforts out across the spectrum. Hiring is very important, making sure there's equal opportunity for open jobs internally and externally to all backgrounds, genders is very important. But equally, once you're in the door, is your onboarding seen with an equity lens? Is your do you have the policies and programs and processes at your disposal that help you ensure that you're operating, with a very fair and impartial lens. When you're looking at a performance, management promotions, our biases not coming in the way, right? And we've engaged partners like you and others to ensure that we're learning along the way as an organization, and taking our people along with us and sharing our learnings. And I think that's also really important. If you feel that you've got a learning in the journey of DEI, I think a big part of it is share that learning with the organization at large. I make it a point that in every town hall, I talk about this, that this is my learning this month, and I ensure that each leader gets the space and time in the town hall to talk about how they're putting that value in action and becoming role models for others. And it's not just about the positives, it's also about our learnings along the way, so that we take people along with us in the journey. I think the journey is like a living, breathing organism. And it's important to give it that space. And if I have to do it all over again, I would include that right from the beginning of the journey. And I would ensure retention, I would ensure hiring, I would ensure experience right from word go. And that's going to be right. So what are the few matrices? Of course, gender ratio, retention of your historically excluded groups, whatever you identify them as, is the second. And I think the third metric is when you're doing your surveys, your engagement surveys, any survey which is done while people are still thriving in the organization, not just the exit ones. Look at the cuts of the historically excluded groups. Make sure you're giving the choice to people to identify as unique genders. You're giving the choice to people to identify as people with disabilities in those surveys,
Right.
so that people feel free. And if they're not comfortable disclosing their demographic, they should also have that choice, I feel. So I think these are some of the learnings. So we look at those cuts in, certain ways, compare it, contrast it, compare it with the previous years, compare it with each demographic, with region, with each plant, with each location, and make sure that our insights are data based,
Yeah.
and not intuition based.
Absolutely. So I have one more question. Ever since this third wave has passed, a lot of organizations have been talking about getting employees back to office. And there has been a pushback from employees for not any other reason, but for the fact that many of them have found their balance. So many of them have gone back to their hometowns, and they are able to work productively, contribute productively, and also able to take care of whatever their personal obligations are, maybe towards their parents or their families or their children, or maybe their own health issues. Now, in such a scenario where organizations are insisting that no, we want you in office. Now, how does this, work in the context of DNI, where we are not respecting the individual needs of employees today? Some people might want to get back to office because they miss that interpersonal interaction.
Hmm.
But then it's a very, again, let me put it this way, it's a personal choice. And when we had done this survey very recently on evolving employee expectations, most of the employees are asking for flexibility to choose from where to work from, flexibility to choose their timings, flexibility to choose their compensation structures, because COVID has made them realize, or rather reprioritize a lot of things in life.
Well said, Sonika. So at Avery Dennison, we're a traditional brick and mortar industry, right? We have our plants, physical assets. So those have never gone remote for us. Right from day one, our plants were operating because we are a part of the essential services industry. The lockdown, we were prepared to make
Yeah,
sure that within the lockdown, we continue to produce and we continue to supply essential commodities, because they're so important in the pharmaceutical sector for vaccines, etc. And we've done a great job. Kudos to the entire people machinery for really handling that complexity so well. But we also have a set of employees which are more service in nature, which are more customer facing in nature, for whom going to a plant and working on the asset is not the nature of job,
yeah,
right? So we have segmented our talent accordingly, right? We segmented our talent to ensure that the people who need to be with the assets, for them the policies and the way it looks, the way the programs and the benefits, etc., that look like, and the rules of engagement look like, have stayed constant. For
mhm,
others, we have divided them into two categories: people who need to come to the office for collaboration purposes. These are the people who don't have to come every day, work 9 to 5. Their attendance needn't be, one getting marked and controlled, etc. These are the guys who need to come for collaboration, right? And they choose to do so because, for example, Sonika, if you're in R&D and I'm in product management, if I'm not meeting those once or twice a week where there are common projects, brainstorming, challenging each
yeah,
other, then the
yeah,
outcome suffers. So it's a
yes,
very outcome driven decision, right?
yes,
And then there are others who come, they choose their days, who come in the week as per their own function. They attend their meetings and, along with the consent of their manager and their functional head, decide their timings.
yes,
So we've got a flexible approach and a hybrid approach, right?
yes,
Depending on the segment of talent that, depending on the nature of work that you're lying in. So far, it has worked for us. There have been exceptions. There are always exceptions, but they're not the norm for
yes,
us. Whereas in general, um, people have been very excited about embracing newer rules of engagement, ways of working, and they have owned it, because we have not made unilateral decisions. We've involved people in the decision making process, done surveys, ensured that we are communicating the results of those surveys to them. If there are different points of view, we are telling them what the logic of a different decision is. As much as possible, we try to communicate two-way, and listen as much as possible. So I won't say it's perfect, because the COVID situation has evolved so much. Each wave has put us back in the rollout.
Yes.
So we went back and we came back, and now we're in the phase where we're keeping our fingers crossed and hoping that our framework works. So yeah.
But it's a very logical approach. I was questioning more of those companies where they have mandated like a 5-day week, 9 to 5 compulsory attendance. So I was more questioning. So you have embraced an hybrid working model, which is
That's true.
completely fine, right? So you have embraced that this is the new way of working. It gives flexibility. It makes people own their working timings, their styles. When they need to collaborate, they collaborate. When they need to come, they come. So it's perfectly fine. So that need for flexibility is answered for. And as you said that, people also want that real-time communication, that authenticity and transparency. So when you are involving them and there is two-way communication, they feel valued. So even if they give feedback and you turn back and say that, no, this is not possible and this is the logic, they at least feel heard and they feel that, okay, this is how it is. But my issue is more where organizations are turning a blind eye to the fact that things have changed significantly in the workforce, where and for 2 years, most organizations have worked remotely. So why this insistence on a 5 or 6 day a week, 9 to 5 kind of attendance? Is
difficult to comment, right, Sonika, because you're aware and I'm aware that one size never fits all, right? It is so unique to each organization's DNA, right? For example, even pre-COVID, we were really embracing Google Hangouts and tools such as these, right? But there were companies which weren't so adapted using it. So for them, their learning curve started with that. Our learning curve started very differently because we'd probably possibly progressed to that already. Sonika, am I audible?
Yeah, completely.
Okay. Sorry, I thought there was a lag at my end. Okay. So I think every organization journey is also so different, right? So if, say, a framework has worked for every denizen, I cannot put a hand to my heart and say it will work for a different organization, right? Because the framework was customized for success here, and tomorrow, if I'm asked to consult for a different organization, I'm going to be asking a whole bunch of questions to see what framework will succeed there, and it's possible.
And what would those questions be?
Those questions will be exactly this, what is the level of competence in embracing technology, right? What is the level of competence in people owning their outcomes of their work? What is the learning curve with that? Because if it's a fairly nascent journey, Sonika, organizations at the end of the day exist for business and profits, right? And if it's a nascent journey, then it might be that the organization just wants to enhance productivity.
And would you also question trust? That do we trust our employees to take ownership of their outcomes?
I would trust is an integral part of every culture, right? Because if in my team, 8 out of 10 people are not taking ownership for the outcomes, there's possibly something wrong in the trust level I have empowered them with.
Could you say that again? We lost you in the middle a little bit.
So no problem. If 8 out of 10 people in my own team, just as an example, do not demonstrate outcome orientation, there's possibly something wrong with my leadership style, I would say, and the culture that I have created. But it's also possible that I'm a new leader, right? Or it's also possible that the whole journey of remote working is so new for me, that my people haven't quite embraced it. right? And I want to ensure that I continue to train them. I think it's a very context driven conversation. And that's when I read in the media, etc., criticism about a company's policy. Without the context, I find it very difficult to judge it. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, so for those who might be embarking, starting completely afresh, So, for example, talking about DNI, there are so many dimensions. We talk about women participation, we talk about LGBTQI inclusion, we talk about people with disability, we talk about generational diversity. But when we talk about inclusion is inclusion. It doesn't matter what dimension of diversity we are talking about. But very often, organizations want to tackle one dimension of diversity and then move on to the next. Where do you think this approach is coming from? Why? Because there was a time in before 2018 where the LGBT, we were hiding behind the act, the LGBTQIA was not out in the open because of the act. But now it is no longer so. There is so much more awareness. Generation Z is so much open. Most of our workforce today and many leaders today are millennials and far more accepting. So, what is holding us back to, accelerate work around inclusion of the LGBTQ community and people with disabilities?
Yeah, Sonika, this is another thing that I feel really strongly about, right? I feel the more you broaden your gamut of embracing diversity and not limit it, right? The more you are, you know, truly making it a part of the culture. Otherwise, it's tokenism. Otherwise, it's done because my boss has asked me to chase a certain ratio, right? And when it's done to chase a certain ratio because I have been asked, I, along with anybody else, will have a tendency to cut corners.
Right.
And I'm as human as the next person, right? But if my mandate is less about, hey, this is the number you've got to chase, but more about, hey, every person who walks in the door of every denizen, needs to own the fact that they are unique and others around them are unique and they respect that uniqueness, then it's a very different it's a very different canvas. Then you paint your own ratios, right? You paint your own retention rates, you paint your own engagement narrative, and you paint your own demographic narrative as well. So I would sincerely urge everybody to make your canvas very broad. And just ask oneself the question, is a certain demographic making me uncomfortable, and that's why I am not embracing diversity, of that particular historically excluded group. uh, and I can be open here, right? It took me a lot of reading, a lot of self introspecting to even understand the difference between a different sexual orientation and a different gender identity. And I still meet people who struggle with that, right? And I think that struggle is good, because when they are struggling is when they're asking themselves the right question. I work with this amazing, most intellectually sound, I highly respect him for his intellectual prowess. He had once told me many months back that I don't understand this LGBTQI business. Okay, with all due respect, Manvi. you know and in the sales conference, we invited a very highly respected transgender woman this time, and trans woman, and she really opened up about her narrative, her story, her coming out story, her dreams, aspirations, her gratitude for her parents. And he messages me and he says, hey, this person is just like me.
Yeah.
And that was such a goosebump moment for me, Sonika, because this was inclusion, right? This was inclusion. And I think this is how that starting small kind of happens as well.
Beautifully said. Yes. I have been working in this space of LGBTQIA inclusion. And the other day, I was speaking to somebody from the US, and she used the word gender dysphoria. And I did not understand it. And I hesitated for a minute. And then I took the courage to say that, I don't understand this word. And can you explain it to me? And she very kindly explained it to me. So sometimes, it is also important to overcome your hesitation and with humility ask. They don't mind it. What they don't like is being invisible or
Well
being
said.
disrespected. And sometimes we make them invisible because of our own discomfort or
Absolutely.
our own lack of awareness, because
Well said.
nobody wants to accept that I don't know, right? So it was such a wonderful moment for me to say that, I don't know, I don't understand this word. I know I have been working in this space, but can you explain it to me? And then she explained with examples, and it was beautiful. And great learning experience. And I do
And so
believe
now you need to explain to me what's gender dysphoria, if you can take 2 minutes. And I'm
so
sure
we
the
will
audience will learn as well.
okay, so gender dysphoria is when somebody is born with a certain gender, okay, and they don't identify with that gender, and they want to represent themselves in another gender. The kind of dissonance that they feel emotionally and mentally, that this is my body that I am, but I don't align with it. I don't identify with it, but I cannot represent myself in the society or in front of others as what I want to or what I see myself as. Now, this is a mental it's a condition, it's a mental condition that trans people have before they accept their identity. So because of our social conditioning, it takes time for them to accept. There is a lot of confusion that they go through, because in a lot of societies we still don't have these discussions in our families. At school, there is educators are not trained to have these conversations. Counselors are not easy to find who are trained to have these conversations. So this gender dysphoria that develops in people, where they cannot identify with the body that they are born in and the body that they want to be in, creates this mental dissonance called as gender dysphoria.
Thank you. Thank you for adding to my learning.
So, right now, this is also very raw. I think the way she explained to me was phenomenal. And yeah, so it is, and to really, I don't know how many of you tracked that child who died by suicide on 25th of February. That was another very heart-wrenching incident where the school did not take up ownership for what was happening.
It's heartbreaking. Yeah. And that's why I think the family, education, everybody needs to take ownership for diversity. Of course, workplaces play such an important role in advocacy, but at a policy level, there's so much to do. At a education policy level, so much to do. From a family construct, from a family education perspective, there's so much to do. I think often we focus on children's education, and it's so important sometimes to educate families, right? And that's where our education system just misses it out, right? And I agree with you. It was a heartbreaking incident, Sonika, and I think all of us in the society are equally accountable for incidents like this.
Yeah. And, I remember an incident that had happened with one of our interviewees in Marching with Pride. And she said that my HR called me aside, and she said she was a lesbian. And she said, my HR called me aside, and she said that, we're having an annual day. Everybody is going to be bringing their families, but you are requested not to get your partner because I don't know how the families of other employees are going to react. Now, that is not inclusion, that is tokenism.
Well said. Well said. We had a very similar incident in our organization, Sonika. Someone actually, I still think of it to that day, someone actually raised the question in one of the larger forums about, hey, I can define my family as a friend, and I can define my family as, a flatmate. I can define my family as anybody, right? And it's obviously a very thought provoking question, and it made me realize that the traditional construct and definition of family has undergone a big change, and that definition of family plays such a crucial role in HR policies. We
Yeah,
don't realize it, right? Our insurances,
yeah,
our nominations for,
yes.
whether it's a provident fund, gratuity, any kind of superannuation, etc. um, our these family days, engagement events, etc., all of them revolve around the family. And what happens when the definition of family becomes different and broader, and with the new, the new generation really challenging thought processes around it, companies have to really catch up. They have to
Yeah.
catch up really fast.
So I recall a similar thing. We were making inclusive policies for a client, and their legal said that for all LGBTQ employees, they have to give an affidavit that their partner, if they want to get included in the medical insurance or other health benefits, then they are the partner. So I asked a question. I was speaking to the HR Spock. I said, do you take a similar affidavit from other employees that their nominees are their legally wedded partners, or their nominees in the gratuity form or the PF form or the medical insurance form? Do you take an affidavit from them? They said no. And they said, then why this? Do you even take a proof of the wedding? Do you take a wedding photo or a wedding certificate? How do you know it's true? I can put anybody's name there and say he's my husband.
Yeah. And I think these things are institutionalized, right, Sonika, conditioned
Yeah.
into us, our brains, the way we are, just brought up to think. And these questions, I think the ones that you're asking and the ones that we're talking about will really make a difference in the long run. They already are. Like for example, we've changed our insurance policy last year, and we're doing a few other things. But I know a lot of companies doing a lot more than us, which we are trying to reach, that level as well. And there's always a bit of a journey. But I do genuinely feel that these are the right questions to ask. We may not have the answers today, but when we keep asking and keep
Yeah.
discussing, we find answers, we discover answers.
Absolutely. So one last question before we wrap up. I'm mindful of the time, Manvi. Small things make big impact, and each one of us, as you said, is accountable. So what can each one of us do, not just at workplaces, but even in our personal lives, so that we continue to bring this little change? Because each one of us has influence, and one little ripple will connect with another ripple, and we will all create change.
Yeah, Sonika, I feel there's nothing like a personal example to answer that question, right? And I've spoken a lot about the workplace thing, what we do for the community as Avery Dennison. I do a fair bit myself in my personal capacity, but I think there are these small things that all of us can do, right? And I can share an example. I've always observed whenever there's house help coming to our houses, and I see that in most houses, they're They're often, sometimes they have different utensils that they use, or they sit on the floor, or they sit in a different place and eat. Some of us with full-time household help who are, and I feel so grateful to them, because they, my full-time household help is the reason I can do this conversation without worrying about lunch and dinner, right? Yeah. I think we should really include them and make them a part of our family events as much as possible, right? So, and I cannot say there is a standard to reach there, right? For example, tiny little things that I've started to do is, hey, why don't you use the same dining table as me when you're eating, right? Why don't you use the same glass as what my family is doing when you're eating, or when you're drinking water? Just what, why don't you eat the same thing that is getting cooked? I think it's such an important part to practice inclusion every day, every minute, and not be hypocritical about it. um just truly being grateful to everybody who adds value to your life will really help. I think that's the example I can share, but there's so much more that we can do. We talk about equal wages for equal work at the workplace, but when we haggle with vegetable sellers, fruit sellers, our car cleaners for 100 rupees, 200 rupees, it makes me wonder, what is it that we are saying? And I think these little things that I'm questioning myself on, I'm not saying everybody does it, maybe everybody doesn't, but maybe it's just my own learning that by asking myself these questions, I am becoming a more inclusive person, and I'm practicing inclusion every minute. You know, and I think that's helpful to me. And if I can offer that advice to others, I'm sure it will be helpful to others.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much, Manvi. I loved our conversation today. I think it was straight from the heart. I did not follow the script at all. I just, whatever came to my mind, as we always do, I
We
asked
do,
you.
yeah. Yeah. I didn't realize that an hour went by, and the time always flies in a conversation with you, Sonika. My humble gratitude for having me on this call today. Faisal, thank you. HRAI, thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. And are you on your way to the flight, to the airport?
Yes, I'm actually right outside. I'm going to pack up and go in. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Have a good flight.
Thank
So,
you. Bye.
once again, before we move to the Q&A session, we will be just initiating the poll. Request all participants to kindly share your feedback.
Sorry, I didn't realize it was a Q&A session. My apologies.
No issue. We'll just check. In case there are any questions, we'll take it up, or else we'll wind it up. So request all participants to kindly post their questions in the chat box.
I see comment coming in, but no questions as yet.
Okay. So we'll just close then. Thank you, Ms. Sonika, for moderating this entire DNI series. You have taken out the best out of all the speakers. Thank you, Ms. Manvi, for sharing your valuable insights and experiences on this very enthralling topic. It has been a pleasure being with you today. I am sure our participants have had a lot to learn and take away from this session. This would not have been possible without Marching Sheep, where we are privileged to be working with them on this series. I once again thank our dear speaker, Ms. Manvi and Ms. Sonika, for joining us today. Do join us next week for our next masterclass series starting from 21st March 2022 at 3 p.m. That's it for our today's webinar. See you soon. Stay safe. Take care and bye for now.
Thank
Thank
you,
you, Ms.
everyone.
Sonika. Thank you, Ms.
Bye.
Sonika.
Thank you. Thanks, Sonika, again. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.